Good morning, party people. It's Goats here. I would like to take you through my latest song, Corvids, and show you a bit more of my creative process when making drum and bass in Ableton Live. Um, before going into Corvids, I'd like to talk a bit more about my templates. This is a trick I picked up from Bill Gates and the guys at the producer Dojo to make a template. And their philosophy, in one of their philosophies, um, reduce as much of the barriers or what they call friction between in the process. So between you and putting that idea in your mind onto the DAW. And one of these aspects is to optimize your DAW itself by having a template. So you want to keep your default project to an empty project so that when Ableton launches, it launches to an empty project fast. It doesn't have to load anything. Um, but once you get to making music for a bit of time, you start to have a bit of an idea of what you prefer to do. And like, for example, if you prefer to have drums in MIDI versus in audio, if you like to use presets bass or audio bass, and how do you do your side chaining is very important too. And once you get a good idea of how you do that, you can kind of make your template based off of that, and that template will keep on evolving as you make music and you get better and better at it. And so this is how I make it. There's no wrong or right way, but I thought this might be interesting for others to see. So I have a few main channels, main groups. There's drum meat, that's hats and stuff and top loops, sub and mid bass. Sometimes those might be together. Melodic, which is everything other instruments, and effects, which includes impacts, risers, downlifter, noise. That's where I would push crash cymbals too, because they don't quite accomplish the same role as either the hats or the drum and the snare. And so, drum drum meat, kick and snare are your two main elements in pretty much all electronic music. The kick is the most loud element of the track. So you want to anchor that as close, very close to 0 dB, as much as it warrants anyway. And then every sound will be pushed up to that level to be at least equal to the kick. We never ever turn the kick down. Or maybe we do like 1 or a half dB, but the kick is the loudest element and it should stay the loudest element. Uh, Snare, pretty much the same thing with the snare, but it's a bit more permissive because it doesn't have all that low information to it, and it's very short, so it tends to just pierce right through. But yeah, this is how I like to do it. I have a clipper on each bus, and the side chain is already set up. That's a big element. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to do in Ableton. But yeah, let's move on to Corvids. This song started like many other songs before by just trying to copy another great song. Just one, Snakes and Villains by Dustin and T-Man. I don't feel smitten, think I feel let's not play too much of it. Recreating this song in its entirety as much as possible was starting with finding the kick and snares, the most loudest elements of the song. So that's the snare. Very snappy, very clap snare. And then there was the kick here. So pretty low, not much high information. Pretty tight too. I found this kick in my library that's very boomy but had the same tone to it, same note, you know. So I got that for now. This snare, I'm pretty sure I made this. I'm not sure where it comes from. It's 32 audios, 0004, etc. Um, But that, I'm pretty sure, was made by making a clap snare, because most snares in drum and bass aren't actually just snares. They're like a clap snare where you have the very short attack and a little bit of the body of the snare. But then on top of that, you have a clap that has a bit of attack, so it lets the attack of the snare through, but then you have the body of the clap. Let me show you what I mean here. If I go into this, I have a clap here and snares, but this is a clap snare. You can hear both the sine tone of the snare, and you got the body of the clap to it. Most drum and bass snares are made like that anyway, in my opinion. So that's how I made this guy. When it comes to the hats, very simple, very straightforward, as opposed to the very layered song I would do before. This is just on the beat, a little bit of shuffle here and there. Place on the 3 here for this hat ride type thing. That goes counter to the snare. That's on the 2 and the 4. And that's an easy way to put some good groove into your drums. That's how the original is too, if you listen to it. I don't feel smitten, think I feel shaken up, think I feel bitten, feel like man are trying to damn. So yeah. And you want to use different hat samples that have different places in the frequency spectrum. I'll hear often a lot of people use like 2-3 different sounds hats that are in the same range, so they kind of overlap, and it gets a little muddy and not very precise. This bass, let's be honest here, I actually started with a preset. I'm not the best at sound designing, and so I like to start with something that sounds really good and then manipulate that a little bit more. And so this patch had most of it already. I just changed the shape a little bit. So yeah. Most of this sounds come from the FM to an octave, actually 3 octaves and a 5th above it. So we turn the FM down. It's still a very nice like wavetable. I had good movement with the filter, and it was like this initially. But how you get those really gnarly sounds is by getting that +7 semitone on the FM oscillator. And then it was just a matter of finding the exact nice sweet spot on both the wavetable position and the FM from one sub to the next. So all that really changes between one repetition and the other is like this FM goes from 105 to 110, and then the wavetable changes a little bit. Yeah, from 106 to 110. Just a little bit of variation here and there. And for the second drop, just turn the FM down. Relatively straightforward. Same shape, same everything. When I make a song, I try as hard as possible to also make an intro for it, at least make the space for it, the 16 bars, and put, an impact and a drone and something like that. In this case, I had a lot more inspiration, obviously, but it really helps to have that little bit of intro rise to the drop, and then just a break, just so that you can pick up the project easy, because it's really hard to keep working on an existing project that's just a 16 bar loop. It might sound great on the day of, but when you open it again 7 days from now, you're not going to be in the same mind space, and it's much harder to it's much easier to pick up when you already have, a minute done on your own song versus a really good 15 seconds, at least in my opinion. Yeah, I like to put the effects rather soon, and so I thought, oh, what's cool as a snake? Crows. So I found some cool crow documentaries on YouTube and recorded that.
Ravens were symbols of wisdom and age-old knowledge. Along with wolves, they held the highest position in Norse mythology.
And I used Lala.ai to separate voice from noise.
As divine creatures.
You see, there's all these like calls and stuff like that behind.
But things were not to remain that.
But Lala.ai, and I'm sure other AI models can do that. They'll separate the noise from the voice in a movie soundtrack or a video game cutscene. That's a good place to get some samples. So that was the initial idea for Corvids. I mean, as you can see, 75% of it was there already. V2 is when I started thinking like, oh, what if I put the crow sounds in the bass sounds? And this is what happens. So without the vocoder, it sounds like this. And I found that it really needed to be very gritty and lots of distortion for it to work. Because if it didn't have any, like this, that's not too bad. But it has less. There's less for the vocoding track to grab onto. I didn't actually do much processing here, just having to place the right sample at the right time so they sound, on time. And variation here, different crow sound. Yeah. You just kind of, adjust depth all the way so that it affects a lot, and then you can play with deformant. And yeah, not quite all the way wet, because that's gonna be just the top information. And pull back a little and keep this up. Boom, there it is. This is just a little bit of cherry on top. It's already super loud. But the distortion filters are for later. And then this reverb I didn't use on this track, but I used a lot here in the original patch. You can hear that there's a bit of reverb tails here, but not here. And I found those really cool, but I couldn't find a way to actually like augment them in Serum. So instead, I just automated a reverb dry wet, and that filled up the space really nicely. Yeah. So that's a good one. That's a trick I picked up from Eliminate. You put the size, the decay all the way up, and then you automate the reverb when the dry wet when you want the reverb to come through. When it comes to drums, the kick changed a little bit. The switch from this to that, bit more upfront, less acoustic. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. We added the little narrator bits from a wholly different video I watched in the meantime.
Ravens were symbols of wisdom and age-old knowledge.
There's this box from Ahi.
Ravens were symbols of wisdom and age.
Just as a bit of a volume boost, and that's all. And that's most of the tune right there. Let's jump to version 8 now, where there's a marginal improvements. Just adjusting things after listening in the car, after listening at work, is very important. So for me, like listening the same songs in different contexts will make different things pop out. Like, oh, there should have been a crash at this spot, and there isn't for some reason, or things like that. I added this reverse bass sound, sucks you into the drop. Made a whole new kick. So I like the other kick. I only like the attack part, so I EQ'd it. And took the load from a different kick together. A little bit of compressor, a little bit of overdrive. Sounds pretty good. And so that's what this drum sound like together. And the basses, yeah. Hey, we'll go a bit over the mastering process too. Try to demystify that a little bit. I mean, I don't want to pretend that I know what I'm doing here, but I think I'm starting to get an idea of it. Basically, mastering is that step where you have all of your mix down, your song is finished, you got the whole thing, and we're just trying to make it a little bit more bright, a little bit more loud, a little bit more this, a little bit more that. And the way we do that is by doing little adjustments crucially, without taking away what you already have. So the danger very often is to lose the transients. So if you try to slam a song into a limiter, it'll take the loudest part of the song, the transients, and squish them down as you push everything back up onto it. And so everything gets squished, squish, 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 squish. And that doesn't really sound good. Um, and so the trick is to make the tiny adjustments. When you get half a dB here, half a dB there, you get a little bit more brightness there, a little bit more stereo wideness here. And by doing these tiny little adjustments, you get a big difference at the end of that, whether it's in volume, brightness, stereo field, all of that. Uh, so, and you want to use a lot of plugins for that, and so that's why you want to work with your final audio file, one track, and then you free up your computer to do all of this fun stuff with it. Because these plugins usually take a lot of CPU too. Um, so for me, it starts with Ozone 8 Elements, which I picked up on a promotion for a few dollars. Um, so a bit of an equalizer, the mid sides. I don't tend to touch on the mid side too much. Um, Imager, I try to make things as stereo as I like them right off the bat. Sometimes you can make them a little bit wider here, and that makes it nice. Maximizer, I'm not quite sure I understand what it does, to be honest. It seems to be a bit like a limiter, but in inverse, where everything under a certain threshold gets pushed up to another certain threshold. Um, so it essentially makes the quietest part of your track louder without bringing the loudest part down, like what a compressor usually does. Um, and then I added this overdrive, which is filtered heavily to do just the high frequencies, and that gives the Hudson high frequency a bit more sparkle, brightness, and makes them stand out a bit more. Omni compressor, see just a little bit of tiny threshold, tiny ratio. And this is the fast compressor, so you want to use a fast and then a slow. The fast will catch the fastest parts of your track, the transients, the hats, the little bits that go, the little impacts. Um, that will not, but you don't want this to be catching your kick transients. So you give it a very short attack, a very short release, and that'll shave off a little bit off the top. And then you have a slower compressor that is also adjusted to your low frequencies, so that the low frequencies don't trigger the compressor as much. That's what will make a mastering compressor or a regular compressor is it'll react differently to the low frequency. So I get a good dB, 1 dB in there with Kotelnikov TDR, which is pretty good and free to use, free to download. A limiter, another limiter. So, for example, if you try to push 3 dB in one limiter, that's not going to sound as good as if you push 1 dB on 3 different limiters. Try it yourself. And that's the idea behind the mastering, is that when you try to make one big change with one thing at a time, you often end up losing definition, making sacrifices. But if you make tiny adjustments here and there, those adjustments end up to make a big difference. So here's how it sounds. As always, you want to be listening to the loudest part of your track when you're doing this, because you're hitting all your limiters and all that. So we get quite a bit from this one. Quite a bit here. Another little bit there. And then another dB here. There we go. That's how we end up with. And that's how I do it anyway. That's how I see it. You make all of these incremental little changes to the volume, to the EQ, to the stereo field. That can be make a very big difference on the mastering, is like how much stereo you're putting through. And I generally try to hit about -8, -6 dB when I'm mixing. And -10 will do just fine. You can push -10 pretty good. And with the mastering, you can get like -3, -4. Yeah, so that's the idea. And I hope that demystifies things a little bit for you. And I hope you enjoyed and learned something today. Thanks for coming along with me on this journey with the Corvids. And I'll see you guys soon. Peace.